Once more, Andrew found himself seated in the principal's office, listening to a litany of concerns about his son, Luke. This had become an all-too-familiar routine in recent times. Luke's behavior ranged from occasional rudeness towards his teachers to incidents like breaking windows or getting into fights, despite countless discussions and attempts at discipline. Andrew had tried talking to him, even resorting to threats of cutting his allowance, but nothing seemed to penetrate Luke's defiance. The transformation in Luke's demeanor had begun immediately after the tragic loss of Andrew's wife, Hannah. Luke was just 10 years old when she passed away, and their bond had been exceptionally strong. Hannah had played an active role in Luke's upbringing. Andrew, however, was engrossed in his demanding business, often away for days and nights. Consequently, Luke had minimal interaction with his father and primarily relied on his mother for companionship. Then, without warning, illness claimed Hannah's life 6 months later. Money couldn't stave off her inevitable fate. From that moment on, Luke's world crumbled. He oscillated between bouts of inconsolable weeping and long stretches of haunting silence, grappling with the immense loss. Andrew tried his best to provide support, but his son retreated further and spoke to him less and less, trapped in the clutches of his profound grief. Andrew sought the assistance of renowned psychologists, but their efforts yielded meager results. As the years passed, Luke withdrew deeper into his cocoon of solitude. In stark contrast, Andrew immersed himself even more in his work, resuming his routine of early departures and late returns, inadvertently leaving his son in the care of their housekeeper, their days passing without any meaningful father-son interaction. Andrew attempted to bond with his son, at least during the weekends, often taking him on walks in the park or fishing trips. However, these efforts yielded little improvement, and before long, distressing calls from the school became a recurring theme. According to Luke's classroom teacher, he had engaged in a physical altercation with a fellow classmate, prompting Andrew to cancel an important work meeting and rush to the school. Knowing that he would once again face admonishment for his son's behavior, Andrew braced himself for the inevitable. The principal's reprimand was stern and unsparing. "We hold you in high regard, Mr. Andrew," the principal began, "but your son's behavior is becoming increasingly aggressive." He instigated a violent altercation with a classmate over a trivial matter, resulting in severe harm. "We are compelled to consider the possibility of expelling Luke from our institution." Andrew tried to interject, offering to cover the costs of any necessary treatment, but the principal remained resolute. "Certainly, we appreciate your offer, but we are left with no desire to retain your son in our esteemed school. I strongly advise you to seek professional help for Luke, perhaps consulting a psychiatrist." Leaving the principal's office in a state of despondency, Andrew nodded in reluctant agreement and walked silently to his car. During the journey home, he resolved to break the silence and attempt another conversation with his troubled son. "Tell me," Andrew asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "What is lacking in your life?" He continued, anger creeping into his tone. "You have wealth, a state-of-the-art laptop, the latest model of a cell phone. Why this anger? Why do you embarrass me in front of others? Do you think it's been easy for me after your mother's passing?" "But I'm trying to hold it together," the boy responded, his gaze fixed on his hands. "I didn't attack him for no reason," he added, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. Andrew pressed further, his concern evident. "Then please, tell me why you punched Eli in the nose." "That was completely uncalled for. He was sharing pictures of his family, and you resorted to violence. Why did you do that?" The boy, feeling defeated, decided there was no point in defending himself. He turned away from the window and retreated into his thoughts as they continued driving in silence. Andrew's irritation simmered, and it boiled over when they abruptly stopped at a crosswalk to allow a homeless man, struggling with a leg injury, to pass. Andrew lost his temper and uttered harsh words towards the unfortunate man from the car window. Luke couldn't bear his father's unkindness and voiced his disapproval, urging his father not to treat people in such a manner. In response, Andrew sternly instructed his son to stay out of it unless directly involved. Upon returning home, Andrew informed his son that he had decided to homeschool him, and the following week, teachers began coming to their house to provide education. However, even at home, problems persisted. The teachers complained that Luke remained consistently disrespectful and disengaged in his studies, with only one young math teacher managing to avoid conflicts with the troubled boy. Ms. Zoe Gray, a remarkable educator, had miraculously struck a chord with the boy, igniting his interest in the subject. Intrigued by this development, Andrew decided to delve deeper into the background of their new teacher. Ms. Gray was a youthful 26-year-old. She had initially embarked on her teaching career right after graduating and had worked at one of the city's finest schools. However, her path had taken unexpected turns, leading her away from teaching for a time. Intrigued by her abrupt departure from her previous teaching post, Andrew sought to uncover more about her journey. He learned that Ms. Gray had drifted from place to place, seemingly unable to establish a lasting connection with any educational institution until she serendipitously secured her role as a math teacher. For Luke's sake, Andrew appreciated Ms. Gray's effectiveness as an instructor. She possessed a solid educational background, yet Andrew's curiosity drove him to uncover the reason behind her departure from teaching. In his quest for information, Andrew even visited the school where Ms. Gray had once taught. However, the faculty remained tight-lipped about her, and only through a fortunate coincidence did one teacher disclose that the principal had been closely monitoring her, eventually forcing her to leave. In retaliation, the principal had given her a negative evaluation that effectively barred her from future teaching positions. This revelation left Andrew with some doubts. He sought to ensure that Ms. Gray's lessons for Luke were truly appropriate for his age and educational needs. As a result, he made the decision to install a concealed camera in his son's room to monitor the teaching sessions closely. He maintained the habit of regularly reviewing the recorded teaching sessions, but for a while, there was nothing of particular interest to note. Ms. Gray continued to deliver the subject matter in a captivating and comprehensible manner, with Luke attentively absorbing the lessons. Andrew found himself unintentionally impressed by the teacher, privately acknowledging her beauty. One day, following a business trip, Andrew was met by Luke outside their home. To his astonishment, his son greeted him with a warm smile, and their interaction was far more amiable than he had anticipated. Luke willingly engaged in conversation, sharing the details of his day. Andrew couldn't believe his ears, especially when he learned that Luke had reconciled with his old friend, Henry, with whom he had not spoken since his mother's passing. The boys went bowling together, and during the outing, Luke confessed that he had been harboring unfounded grudges against Henry. That day marked the first time in a long while that father and son enjoyed a meal together, engaging in heartfelt conversation and even sharing moments of laughter. Andrew heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that everything had finally settled down. His son, he realized, did not require the services of a psychiatrist, he was just a normal child. As Andrew prepared for bed that night, he suddenly remembered that he hadn't reviewed the video footage from his absence. What he witnessed left him in stunned silence, unable to process what he had just seen and heard. A burning sensation of shame crept up his cheeks and ears, but above all, he felt a deep sense of embarrassment directed inward. Initially, the video footage appeared no different from what Andrew had seen before. But then, the scene took an unexpected turn. Mrs. Gonzalez and Luke sat together on the couch, diligently packing various items and groceries into bags. Luke broke the silence, curiosity in his voice as he inquired, "How long have you been doing this?" Ms. Gray smiled warmly as she responded, "Since my university days. I decided to try volunteering, and it became a meaningful part of my life. At first, I was rescuing stray cats and dogs around town, taking them to shelters, and finding them new homes. Then, one day, I encountered a homeless man on the street. He was elderly, had lost his home, and had been living on the streets for a year. I started by providing him with food and purchasing his medicine. Eventually, I helped him find a shelter that would take him in, and, well, he's still living there today. Impressed by her compassion, Luke gazed at his teacher with admiration and remarked, "Miss Gray, you're amazing. You remind me a lot of my mother. She could never walk past an abandoned kitten or dog without helping them. She used to take them to shelters, and I would often accompany her on these rescues. What about your father? How did he feel about your volunteer work?" A hint of sadness shadowed Ms. Gray's expression as she replied, "My dad didn't even know about it. He never had time. And honestly, sometimes I think he doesn't even like people, let alone animals. There was this one time at a crosswalk. He was so unkind to a homeless man that I felt ashamed. It's like all he ever thinks about is money," sympathized Mrs. Gray. "No, you're not wrong," Luke responded. He went on to confide in her, expressing the deep concern he felt when his mother passed away and how he desperately needed his father's support during that time. However, his father always seemed preoccupied. Even when he started facing bullying at school, he chose to keep it to himself. "They started calling me stupid," Luke admitted, his voice tinged with vulnerability. "I was already in a daze after my mom's passing, but I stayed quiet, didn't react. Then, one day, I lashed out. I realized that was the only way to make them stop. The main thing is that the teachers heard what they were saying to me, but they did nothing because all the kids there were from wealthy families. And when I finally tried to talk to my father about it, he brushed me off, saying he was too busy. It felt like he just didn't care about me." Mrs. Gray listened in silence as the boy poured out his feelings, gently clasping his hand in hers. "And then you came into our lives," the boy continued, his voice quivering with emotion. "I realize that you're different from everyone else. You don't care about what others think or their social status. You're always ready to help those who need it the most. When we were out on the street with you, giving out food to those in need, I saw the immense compassion in your heart. It's almost like my mom's," he added, tears welling up in his eyes. Andrew remained silent, reflecting on how quickly his son had matured and the goodness within him. He couldn't help but blame himself for not being there to listen and protect Luke. However, Mrs. Gray had found a way to reach him. Determined to understand the full story, Andrew decided to speak with the teacher. The following day, he invited Ms. Gray into his office and revealed that he had installed a hidden camera in his son's room, uncovering something important. Ms. Gray reacted with outrage, but Andrew hurriedly reassured her, saying, "I was just worried about my son." However, what he discovered truly took him aback. As soon as Ms. Gray realized the subject was Luke's involvement in volunteering, she blushed and offered an apology for not seeking his permission. She quickly reassured Andrew, "But it was perfectly safe, and you were right not to coordinate with me. I'm certain I would have met resistance." "Now, I see how right you were." Andrew marveled at the transformation he had witnessed in his son. He couldn't help but wonder if Luke's newfound commitment to volunteering played a significant role. "Did your volunteering contribute to this change?" he inquired. Ms. Gray nodded, her eyes reflecting understanding. "I believe so," she replied. "Your son is inherently kind and sensitive. He's also very lonely, which might explain some of his previous actions. After his mother's passing, his world was shattered. Helping others allowed him to discover that he could be needed and provided a means to process his own grief by witnessing the struggles of others." Andrew nodded in understanding, appreciating the insight. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "You're going to donate clothes and food to those in need, Luke, aren't you? Can I join you?" He hadn't anticipated the depth of his determination, considering his prior reservations about homeless people. However, the experience had changed his perspective. Before long, they all ventured into the city to aid the less fortunate. Rose, Andrew, Luke, and even Luke's friend Henry, who expressed a desire to join them, embarked on a mission to help those in need. Andrew had never anticipated the extent of homelessness in their city until that eye-opening day. When they returned home that night, father and son engaged in a deeply heartfelt conversation. "Thank you," Andrew began, addressing his son with genuine gratitude. "Luke, you're growing into such a wonderful person. I'm sorry I ever doubted you." Luke's eyes softened as he responded, "No, Dad, it's me who should ask for forgiveness. I should have recognized what was going on in your heart a long time ago. But I was too focused on business." Andrew then broached a more delicate topic, seeking his son's opinion. "What do you think of this woman?" he asked, glancing at Luke. "She's good and kind," Luke replied. Andrew nodded in agreement, saying, "Yes, I thought I had grown up and understood everything. But one thing I've come to realize is that you can't go through life without someone special." Luke's next words left Andrew somewhat bewildered. "We can't bring Mom back," Luke explained gently, "so maybe you should consider taking care of Mrs. Gray, Dad." Andrew, clearly taken aback, sought clarification. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you deserve to be happy," Luke replied with a knowing smile. Andrew returned the smile, saying, "Thank you, son. Time will tell." A year passed, and the relationship between Luke and Andrew had undergone a profound transformation. Luke returned to a regular school where he felt far more at ease, and the father and son bond had strengthened considerably. Rose no longer resided at their house, but her presence had become a part of it, as she and Andrew had tied the knot a month prior. Andrew had found happiness once again, much like he had with Hannah. Luke had fully supported his father's decision, having encouraged him to follow his heart, and he genuinely rejoiced in his father's newfound joy. They had discussed this matter several times before, and Andrew had been apprehensive that his son might view him as disloyal. However, Luke unequivocally put an end to his father's torment by assuring him that he wholeheartedly embraced his happiness. He knew that their shared happiness wouldn't detract from their loving memories of Mom and their enduring affection for Andrew. Hannah would always hold a special place in their hearts, and Luke occasionally felt as if she were watching over them from heaven, taking pride in how wise and mature her son had grown to be. In the time that had passed, Andrew had engaged in deep reflection and had come to a profound realization: the paramount value in life wasn't amassing great wealth, but rather living in harmony with oneself and the cherished individuals who surrounded him.